Hello everyone, welcome to the class. Today we will talk about how to write a program to connect the network, to connect to the server. So today we will talk about the socket programming. So before we talk about the socket programming, let's review what's a socket. So socket is an interface. So it's already built in our kernel. So our kernel provides this interface. Why we need the interface? Because you don't want to deal with a lot of dirty work for example, how to do the transport protocol, how to follow transport protocol, how to follow the IP address, how to get each block when you transfer data, how you deal with the message inside. So everything this dirty work behind the application are currently managed by us. So what we need to do is we use the special interface is called socket to communicate. So when we want to connect to other computer in your program, this is your program. In this program, you want to use the socket to connection. You just say, okay, I want to create a socket, and I use the socket to do something. I read data into the socket, write data into a socket, or read the data from the socket. So you can treat it, the socket is a files. So again, on the kernel, it's used files as abstraction to process everything. The pipe is a file, the socket is file, everything actually everything in your kernels is files to manage as a files. So here socket is files. When you create a socket, even though the socket has very details behind the scene, but you can easily to communicate to other computer by read and write data into the socket files to communicate. Okay, so this is very convenient way for us to build the connection, build the internet connection. So in this case, if you remember, the socket contain a couple details, except of course it's covered like protocol. What's the protocol you want to use? You want to use IPv4 or IPv6? You want to use what's the transport protocol? You want to use TCP or UDP? So you need to provide this information. And other information you need to provide is what's the IP address and what's the port number. So the socket contain this all information. It contain two IP address, two port numbers, and use this information to build a connection. So you need to provide this. Okay, so this is socket programming. So let's look at the flow chart to do this socket programming on both server side and client side. Okay, this is the flow chart to build the client and server model for your socket. Actually, the server side is here and client side here. So the first one we are going to talk about how to create a socket, how to create the socket files in your kernel. So this is a main topic, the first main topic we want to look at. And in your client, you need to create a socket. In your server, you also need to create a socket. So actually, client and server, they need to create a socket. And there's a one system code called socket. You can use it to support this like a connection. Yes, the name socket, very easy to remember. And the socket will return a file descriptor called S. So you need a file descriptor S to remember the socket like information. And what's the socket information you have? You need to give. So actually, for this one, how you define socket? For this one, you don't need to provide any like address information for now. For now, you need to provide later, but not now. Now you want to set up what's the socket protocol. Okay, what's the socket protocol? So let's cut like three different information you need to provide. There's three. The first one is called domain. So this domain defines what kind of like IP address family you want to provide. For example, you want to provide the IPv4 or IPv6. If you want to provide IPv4, you probably just write AFIMT into this MET into this. So the first one is the domain, and the next one define which protocol, IP protocol, which kind of the internet protocol we want to use. Usually we set 0, which is the IP. So we use the IP protocol Then we use the special IP address because in IP protocol there's two different like IP address format, right? IPv4, IPv6. You need to decide which one you want to do. So actually, it's two parameters define the internet protocol you want to use. The second one, this one is called type. So what's the type here? Actually, type is also a protocol. So this type is actually to define the transport protocol. So what's the transport protocol? Do you remember? TCP, UDP. So it depends on how you transfer the data. Depends on what kind of communication you want to have. You can use TCP and UDP. And for TCP, we can do something like use socket, SOCK, and it's a TCP. So TCP is a reliable one, so it's like a string, so STREAM. So this is for TCP. And for UDP, it's also socket, but it's not the string connection. It's unreliable. It's a data connection. So it's called DGRAM. Okay, so you pass different parameters as a second parameters. You can build a different transport protocol socket to connect. And in this case, we will mainly focus on this one because we want to build a client-server model. So we use a socket string, which is TCP. We want to use a TCP protocol to build the connection. Okay, so this is how you create the socket. And in the client-server model, for both this socket connection, we will choose the TCP one in this case. Okay, so next step, let's talk about server first because we have a more stuff need to like work on. We need to set up on the server side. Client is easy. Client is you just try to connect to some like stuff. But for server, you need to build like a setup. For example, set up a phone number, set up like some extra stuff. So let's do some details you need to do for server. So let's look at the server side a little bit. After the equated socket, there's another part for the server is called bind. What's a bind? Bind is actually try to find your process. What's the process? What's this program? Which port you want to attach this program? So you try to like attach the program into your like particular location inside your machine. So you need to bind the program into this place. So how to bind it? So actually there's another function called bind. So when you call bind, you need to provide the address information. So of course you need to provide the socket. This is socket you just created. To create the interface socket, you bind the socket into particular address. So this is very important in server side. In client, you don't need to worry about it. When you connect, you just try to connect to another server. But for the server, you need to get some prepare for the connection, right? So in this case, you need to provide information for your servers. Let's look at the information about the address. The address use a very special structure. Is like this. The structure defines a couple stuff. First information you want to define is what kind of memory address. Is it IPv4 or IPv6? So inside this address, you define the format. This IP address in this structure is based on this format. So you provide a format. Then you provide the IP address. So this is the IP address. Okay. So you provide the format and IP address. Then, of course, you need to remember the port. The port number is very important. Which port you want to attach your program into. If you want to provide, if this program you are writing with the socket is a web server, then attach to 80, port number 80. So this is an example how you do the information like a setup, this information setup. Just change this IPv4, so this is IPv4. So in this case, you can see we provide the IPv4 IP address here. Then we got the port number is 80. Of course, we need to do some function to convert the data because this is the data for human read. This is not a data for the machine. So we need to use some like other function to convert this data to the right format and assign into this like a structure. So when we got this structure, we just pass the structure into the second parameters. We pass the structure into the second parameters. Then we can attach the socket. We can bind the socket into this particular IP address and IP port number. Okay, so this is how you prepare your server for the connection. Okay, so right now after you finish this preparation, so we this time we can try to like build some connection. So first part, let's talk about the server. So for a server, because the server is not like the server does not try to connect to other machine. It's just keep waiting, right? So when you wait for other connection, there's some like stuff you need to worry about. For example, how many connection I can have, how many option connection I can accept, right? So let's cover details you need to worry. So this is another part, the second step, preparation for this connection. And that's two function you need to use in this moment. The first one is called listen. So listen is easy. You pass the socket number. So what's the file descriptor number for a socket? So this is a socket descriptor. Then you tell how many connection you want to get. So when you use listen, it actually will create a queue. So when you use listen, for example, you say listen 3, then you will get a queue with the 3 elements. So each time one connection here, it will like go into the queue. The second one go here, the third one go here. When you finish the deal with the first one, then you got another space here. So they just like one by one going to this kind of like talk to your process. So this is a way you can define how many connections you are allowed. So this is important. If you don't define it, of course, you will get some trouble because your server can only deal with one connection. It's definitely not a good idea, right? So listen is the next step, preparation. After you do the listen, you still have to use another function called accept. So accept is try to waiting. So listen, prepare a queue. Accept, waiting for the queue. So if I find, I keep waiting, I keep check the queue. If less data come in the queue, I will like get the data and try to do a process. So the idea of accept is if accept see a connection in the queue. So it will search the queue. It will search the queue. It will search the queue by the first one and get it. Then it will create another process. So it will create another process, create another new socket to talk to the process. Why it need to create a new socket? Because the server want to handle multiple connection at the same time, right? You cannot like deal with, okay, my computer, I log into a Google and after I do the search, then other user can do the search. Other user need to wait for me because I'm trying to do a search. Definitely this is not a server. If I have a server, then no one want to use it. So for the accept one, it will receive the information from particular connection. So okay, right now Joe, you connect to me. So okay, I got your connection, and right now I create another process to deal with your request. Then I can looking forward, like I can like look forward to try to like process another connection. So it will receive the first data, the first connection on the queue, then create a new socket to deal with this connection. Then go back to check the queue. Then go back check the second one in the queue. Then create another socket to deal with the second one. Then check the third one. So the accept function guarantees the server can process multiple connections at the same time. So this is very important. So in this moment, After you just like got the socket, got the address, and got this ready, you still need to take care of these details. You need to build how many connections you can allow, you are allowed. Then you need to use accept, try to receive this connection and generate a new socket to deal with this connection, then go back to check another one. So this is the another like details for the server side. This part is very special for server because in the client, you don't need to do this. For a client, you don't care. You just connect. You just connect to one server. You don't need to like worry about it. But the server one, because you need to handle multiple connection at the same time. So this is some like detail you need to pay attention. Okay, this is for accept. Then the next one, you already got something prepared for the connection. So how your client connect to server? How your client connect to server? This is the next topic. So it's not so hard for everything in the client part. This is so straightforward. You create socket and use the socket to connect. How to do a connect? Actually, this is the connect. For the connection, you need to provide very similar one. Actually, this is kind of the same one as what we have. When we bind the address socket to the particular address, right, in server, we provide some information about the IP address, the port number. Of course, here, when you do a connection, you also need to provide this information. What's the IP address family? Do you want to use IPv4 to connect or IPv6? What's the IP address you want to connect? What's the port number you want to connect? So if you can provide this information with your socket, then your kernel will like manage it for you. It will use this address information and the socket interface you already created, try to use it to connect. And when it's connect, this connection will go to the queue. The connection will go to the queue, right? Then your accept function will pick the connection from the queue and try to process it. So this is the flowchart of the connection and this listen accept stuff. So how to make a connection? This one use connection. This one use connection. Connection. No, it's called connect. This one use connect, and this one use accept. So the accept will receive the connect. So this is the idea how you make this connection. So actually, this part for the client is not so hard. It's very straightforward. You make a socket and try to provide some information to the socket, which IP address, which phone number I want to connect. Then the socket will help you to connect to the server. After your client connect to server, then right now, the next step is you try to do some communication, right? You want to like send a request. I want to get this content. Please tell me what's the where's the close movie theater around my house. So then the server will like process, do something and respond to it. So you have a couple like data transfers between two machines in this area. So how to do it? So there's a couple different system code you can use. The one is called send. The second one is receive. The send and receive, they take the socket. So you send to the socket this file descriptor, or you receive from this file descriptor. Okay. So this is something you can use. And of course, you need to use buffer, and you need to provide the length of the buffer. Very similar to read and write the file descriptor. So it will try to like send the data in your buffer, how many bytes into another machine. It will receive how many bytes into this buffer to this machine. Okay. Of course, because the socket is a file descriptor, it's a file, right? So you can also use read and write this file system code. You are familiar with how to use read and write in this case. So you can just use read and write to deal with the socket because socket is a file. Socket is a file. So you can just do read and write. You don't need to like be scared, like be afraid of like you will like mess up because they are just file descriptor. So there's a couple like function you can use to receive, send, read, and write data through this communication between the server and client. Both server and client can use this system code to do the computation. Okay. So the last part for this program is close. So very similar how you close, how you open a file. When you open a file, you need to close it. So here is the same. You just say close the file descriptor, then you close the socket because the socket is file. So remember the close is very important. When you open a file, you should close it. When you create a socket, you open a file, which is socket, you also need to close it. Okay. So this is the logic or a flow chart of your server and client model. It's your socket programming. Okay, so in conclude, what's the function we will use to do a client server? So first one, the client will have a socket. Server will have a socket. Then for server side, you need to do some preparation. So you have a bind, try to bind the socket, this a file into particular address you prepare, because this address is for you to provide your service. Then you need to say listen, means you want to create a space, a queue. How many connections you are allowed at the same time. Then use accept. So accept will try to check the queue. If it's find a connection, it will take the connection out and create another socket to deal with this connection. In this case, your server can deal with multiple connections. And in this case, your client can use connect to connect to the server. So for connect, you also need to provide the IP address, the phone number of the server's information. Then you can make a connection. After you make this connection, you can do a lot of read and write here. So there's a couple functions you can do. You can use read, you can use write, you can use send, you can use receive. So there's a couple functions you can use. Then after you make this communication finish, you already completed the communication. Remember, you need to close the socket, on both sides. For server, you probably won't close it until the machine shut down. But for client, you definitely need to close it. Okay, so but anyway, if you open a socket, you definitely need to close it at some moment. Even for a server, if you want to shut down the server, then you should close it. Okay, so this is the flow chart of the function you will need for your client server model for your socket programming. This is for today. Okay, so today we talk about a couple different function system code on socket programming. Where you want to build a socket, try to connect to server, or try to build a server for your client to connect, you need to use this a socket interface. There's a couple functions, and what's the purpose to use these functions, this system code? So you need to understand. I hope you can understand what's the purpose, what's the reason why we need this, and how they actually do when they deal with the connection. For example, your listens try to create a queue. Why we need a queue? For the accept, why it's create a new socket to deal with the connection. So I hope you understand this part. So for this one, we haven't talked about a little bit some details. For example, how to change the format from one, for example, the human read IP address to the machine read IP address, and what's the format. We didn't cover what the format is. And if you are interested, you can review the slides, and it can give you the idea why you need to change it. And there's so many details on the networking stuff, and we cannot cover everything, but I hope this is useful to you for your future class. Okay, so I hope you enjoy today's video, and see you next time. The socket programming is awesome.